5 Children and It by E. Nesbit. Chapter 10. Scalps. Probably, the day would have been a greater success if Cyril had not been reading The Last of the Mohicans. The story was running in his head at breakfast, and as he took his third cup of tea, he said dreamily, "I wish there were Indians in England. Just little ones, like our size." Everyone disagreed with him at the time, and no one attached any importance to this strange little incident. But when they went down to the sandpit to ask for £100 in 2-shilling notes with Queen Victoria's head on it, to prevent any further mistakes, which they had always felt was the real problem with their wishes, they found out that they had done it again. For of course the Samiade was very cross and sleepy and said,
"Don't bother me. You've had your wish."
"I didn't know it," said Cyril.
"Don't you remember yesterday?"
said the Sand Fairy, still more disagreeably.
"You asked me to let you have your wishes wherever you happen to be. You wished this morning. You've got it." "Oh, have we?"
said Robert.
"What is it?" "So you've forgotten,"
said the Samiade, beginning to burrow.
"Never mind. You'll know soon enough. And I wish you joy with it. A nice thing to have let yourselves wish for."
"We always do somehow," said Jane sadly. And now the odd thing was that no one could remember anyone having wished for anything that morning. The wish about the Indian had not stuck in anyone's head. It was most anxious morning. Everyone was trying to remember what had been wished for, and no one could. And everyone kept expecting something awful to happen every minute. It was most agitating. They knew from what the Samiade had said that they must have wished for something more than unusually undesirable, and they spent several hours in most agonizing uncertainty. It was not until nearly lunchtime when Jane tripped over the copy of The Last of the Mohicans, which of course had been left face down on the floor. When Anthea picked her up, she suddenly said, "Oh, now I know," and sat down flat on the carpet. "Oh, how awful! It was Indians Cyril wished for at breakfast, remember? He said, 'I wish there were Indians in England.' And now there are. And they're going to run around and scalp people, I'll bet, just like they do in storybooks." "Perhaps they'll only be in the north of England, like the Vikings were," said Jane soothingly. It seemed impossible. "Don't you believe it?" said Anthea. "The Samiade said we'd let ourselves in for a nice thing. That means they'll come here. And suppose they try to scalp lamb?" "Well, suppose the scalping would come all right again at sunset, like everything else does." "Not it," said Anthea. "The things that grow out of wishes don't go. Look at the 15 shillings. I'm going to break something. You must let me have every penny of the money we've got. They're going to come here, don't you see? That spiteful Samiade as good as said so. You see what my plan is? Come on." Jane did not see at all, but she followed her sister meekly into their mother's bedroom. Anthea lifted down a heavy water jug with a pattern of storks and tall grass on it, which she never forgot later, and she carried it to the dressing room and carefully emptied the water out into the bath. Then she took the jug back to the bedroom and dropped it on the floor. Now you probably know that if you drop a porcelain jug by accident, it always breaks. But when you drop it on purpose, it's quite different. Anthea dropped the jug 3 times, and it was as unbroken as ever. And so at last she had to take one of Father's boots and break the jug in cold blood. It was heartless work. Next, she broke open the masonry box with a poker. Jane told her that it was all wrong, of course, but Anthea shut her lips very tightly and said, "Don't be silly. It's a matter of life and death." There was not very much in the masonry box, only 7 and 4 pence, but the girls between them had nearly 4 shillings. This made altogether 11 shillings. Anthea tied up the money in the corner of her pocket handkerchief. "Come on, Jane," she said, and ran down to the farm. She knew that the farmer was going to Rochester that afternoon. In fact, it had been arranged for him to bring the 4 children with him. They had planned this in the happy hour when they believed they were going to get £100 in 2-shilling notes out of the Samiade. They had arranged to pay the farmer 2 shillings each for the ride, and now Anthea hastily explained to him that they could not go. But would he take Martha and the baby instead? He agreed, but he was not pleased to only get half a crown instead of 8 shillings. Then the girls ran home again. Anthea was agitated, to be sure, but when she came to think about it afterwards, she couldn't help but seeing that she had acted in a far-seeing way like a born general. She fetched a little box from her corner drawer and went to find Martha, who was laying the cloth out and not in the best temper. "Look here," said Anthea. "I've broken the water jug in Mother's room." "Just like you, always getting up to some mischief," said Martha. "Don't be cross, Martha dear," said Anthea. "I've got enough money to pay for a new one. If only you'd be a dear and go and buy it for us. Your cousin owns a china shop, don't they? And I would like to get it today." "But you're all going into town yourselves," said Martha. "We can't afford to do that and buy a new jug," said Anthea. "But we'll pay for you to go, and you can take lamb. And say, Martha, look here, I've got my Liberty box, and it's awfully pretty, and it's inlaid with real silver and ivory. I'll give it to you if you'll go for us." "I see," said Martha. "No, I don't want your box, miss. What you want is to get the precious lamb out of your hands for the afternoon. Don't you go thinking that I don't see through you." This was so true that Anthea longed to deny it at once. Martha had no business to know so much. She set down the washing with a bang that made them all jump. "I do want the jug today," said Anthea softly. "Please, will you go?" "Well, just this once, if I don't mind. But you mind, you don't go into any outrageous mischief while I'm gone." "You'd better hurry and get dressed," said Anthea eagerly. "Here, put on your purple frock and your hat and yellow collar, and Jane, fetch clothes for Lamb. I'll wash him." As she washed the unwilling lamb and hurried off into his best clothes, Anthea peeped out of the window from time to time, so far as all was well. She could see no little Indians, when with a rush and a scurry, Martha and Lamb had finally left, and Anthea drew a deep breath. "He is safe," she said, and to Jane's horror flung herself down on the floor and burst into tears. Jane did not understand at all how a person could be so brave and yet so sensitive. Anthea had not given way until she had accomplished her mission and gotten Martha and the lamb out of danger. And now she felt certain that the Indians were going to surround them from every corner and would attack the house, and she allowed herself at once to cry. She cried for about 3 minutes until Jane hugged her miserably and said in 5-second intervals, "Don't cry, Anthea, dear. Don't cry." Then she jumped up. She rubbed her eyes raw that they were red for the rest of the day. But at that moment, the cook rang the lunch bell, and nothing could be said until they had all gone down for lunch. When the cook finally left the room, Anthea told her tale. But it is a mistake to tell a thrilling tale when people are eating cold roast beef and boiled potatoes. There seemed somehow something so ordinary about the food that the extraordinary events of the day just seemed unbelievable, and the boys actually laughed and called Anthea silly. "I'm almost sure that before I said anything, Jane wished that it would be a fine day." "I don't remember wishing for that," said Jane briefly. "If I had wished for Indians," Cyril went on, "pass the mustard, please, we would have seen them by now, wouldn't we?" "Then why did the Samoyeds said we had ourselves a nice one?" asked Anthea. She was feeling very cross. She knew she had acted with nobility and discretion, and after all, it was very hard to be called a little silly, especially when she'd had the weight of the jug laying on her conscience. There was a silence during which the cook took away the plates and brought in pudding. As soon as she retired, Cyril began again. "I don't mean to say it wasn't good to get Lamb and Martha out of the way," he admitted. "But as for Indians, well, you know jolly well that as soon as we wish for things, they come true." "I expect they're here somewhere," said Anthea. "They're lurking amid the undergrowth, for anything you know." "In the stories," said Jane, "Indians always attack people unawares." "That's only in stories. In real life, we haven't hurt them. They shouldn't hurt us." "Oh, shut up," said Robert. But Cyril couldn't. You see, he felt in his heart that if he should have wished for Indians, then it would be entirely his fault. So he did not wish to believe that he had wished for Indians, and trying not to believe things when in your heart you are almost sure that they are true, it makes for a very bad temper.
"It's simply silly," he said. "Talking about Indians when you can see for yourself it's Jane who got a wish. Look what a fine day it is, no."
He had turned towards the window to point out the fineness of the day. The others turned too, and in a frozen silence caught at Cyril, and none of them felt as though they could breathe at all. For there, peering out of the corner of the window, among the leaves, was the face of an Indian. He had a tight mouth with bright eyes, war paint on his face, and feathers in his long black hair. Every child's mouth in the room opened and stayed open. The pudding was growing white and cold on their plates, and no one could move. Suddenly, the head was cautiously withdrawn, and the spell over the children was broken, and I'm sorry to say that Anthea's first words were very like a girl. "There now," she said. "I told you so." The children ran upstairs and held a hurried council. "Pax," said Cyril handsomely, when they'd reached their mother's bedroom. "Anthea, I'm sorry. I was such a brute." "All right," said Anthea. "But you see now, don't you?" "Well," said Robert, "there's no denying it. What are we to do now?" No further trace of Indians could be seen from the windows. "The only thing I can think of," said Anthea, who was now generally admitted to be the heroine of the day, "is if we dress up like Indians as we can and look out the windows, or even went out, they might think we were the leaders of a neighboring tribe and not do anything to us." "But what about the cook?" said Jane. "You forget. They can't see or notice anything," said Robert. "They wouldn't notice anything out of the ordinary, even if they were attacked by Indians." "But would they be all right again at sunset?" "Of course. You can't really be hurt and not notice anything. You'd be sure to notice the next day, even if it escaped your attention at the time," said Cyril. "I think Anthea's right. It's our best bet." "I'll go out to the hen house," said Robert. "There's one of the turkeys in there that's been molting. We could use some of its feathers." Earnest reconnaissance convinced them that no Indians were in the poultry yard. Robert went, and 5 minutes later came back, pale, but with a handful of feathers. "Look here," he said. "This is truly serious. When I grabbed the feathers, there was an Indian looking at me from under the coop. I just grabbed the feathers and yelled, and got away before he could chop my head off." "Why should they attack us?" Cyril marveled. "We haven't done anything to them." "But you didn't wish for real Indians, not real people. You wished for the kinds out of your cowboy stories." The children dressed themselves up with feathers, blankets, and scarves. And so they boldly went out to meet their foe. I say boldly because I wish to be polite, and at any rate they went. Along the hedge, dividing the wilderness with the garden, was a row of heads, all highly feathered. "It's our only chance," whispered Anthea. "Much better than to wait for their attack. We must pretend like mad, like that game of cards where you pretend you've got aces when you haven't got any." With that, 4 wild whoops erupted from the children's throats, as near to a war cry as any white child could be expected to give, without having had any previous practice. They rushed through the gate, and stood face to face with the Indians. They were all about the same height as Cyril. "I hope they can speak English," said Cyril. Anthea knew they could, though she couldn't explain later how she knew this. She had tied a white towel around a walking stick as a flag of truce, hoping that the Indians would know that it was meant as peace. Apparently they did, for one stepped forward. "You seek a powwow," he said, in excellent English. "I am Golden Eagle, of the tribe of rock dwellers." "And I," said Anthea with sudden inspiration, "am Auntie, chief of the Mazawattee tribe." "And what mighty warriors be these?" asked Golden Eagle, turning to the others. Cyril said he was the great chief Squirrel of Morning tribe, and seeing that Jane was sucking her thumb and could evidently think of no name for herself, the others added, "This is the great warrior Wildcat." "And thou,"
Golden Eagle asked, suddenly turning to Robert, who, taken unawares, could only reply that he was Bob of the Mounted Police. "And now," said Anthea, "our tribes, if we just whistle for them, will come and outnumber your puny forces. So don't resist us. Therefore, let us smoke the pipes of peace instead." "You got that backwards," said Cyril angrily, but Golden Eagle didn't seem to notice.
"Thy customs are different than ours. Come, bring forth your warriors, and let us have a true powwow, and see who's to become great chief." "We'll bring them up right enough," said Anthea, "with their bows and arrows and tomahawks. Don't you think we won't?" She spoke bravely enough, but the hearts of all the children were beating furiously, and their breaths were coming in shorter and shorter gasps. For the Indians were closing in around them, coming nearer and nearer with angry murmurs, so that they were sure the crowd of faces would soon turn violent. "It's no good," whispered Robert. "I knew it wouldn't be. We must make a bolt for the Psammead. It might help us, but even if it doesn't, well, I suppose we shall live again at sunset. I wonder if it hurts to be scalped." "I'll wave the flag again," said Anthea. "If they stand back, we'll run for it." She waved the towel, and the chief commanded his followers to stand back. Then, charging wildly, at a place where the line of Indians was the thinnest, the 4 children started to run. Their first rush knocked down some 6 of them. The children leapt over the Indians and made straight for the sand pit. This was no time for the safe, easy way, the long way by the carts. They ran right over the edge, and amongst the yellow and pale purple flowers and dried grasses. Yellow Eagle and his followers came up with them just at the very spot where they had seen the Psammead that morning. Breathless and beaten, the wretched children now awaited their fate. Sharp knives and axes gleamed before them, but worse than that was the cruel light in the eyes of Golden Eagle and his followers. "You have lied to us, Thea, and Squirrel, and Wild Fox, and Bob. You have lied to us, if not with your tongues, then by your silence. You have no followers. What shall we do with them?" "Build a fire," shouted his followers, and at once a dozen ready volunteers started to look for fuel. They grabbed hold of the children, who cast despairing glances around them. Oh, if only they could see the Psammead. "Do you mean to scalp us first, and then burn us?" asked Anthea desperately. "Of course," they replied. "That's how it's done." The Indians formed a ring around the children, and now sat on the ground, gazing at their captives. There was a threatening silence. Then slowly, by 2s and 3s, those that had gone off to look for firewood came back. And they came back empty-handed. They had not been able to find a single stick for their fire. No one can ever, for a matter of fact, in Kent. The children drew a breath of relief. But the next moment, they were all seized. They each closed their eyes and tried not to scream, waiting for the sharp pain of the knife, but it did not come. The next moment they were released and fell in a trembling heap. Their heads weren't hurt at all. They only felt strangely cool. When at last the children gathered their courage to open their eyes, they found that the Indians had, instead of scalping them, cut off their blankets. "Oh, what a strange land this is," said Golden Eagle. "You can find no wood to burn my enemies, and these strange creatures don't even scalp properly. Oh, if we were only in our native land once more." Suddenly, a flash of lightning. The golden gravel shone all around the 4 children, and instead of the strange figures, there was nothing. The Psammead must have been there the whole time, and he had given the chief his wish. Martha brought home a jug, with a pattern of a stork and a long grass on it. Also, she brought back all of Anthea's money. "My cousin gave me the jug for luck," she said. "It was an odd one, The basin had been smashed, but not the jug. "Oh, Martha, you're a dear," sighed Anthea, throwing her arms around her. "Yes," giggled Martha. "You'd better make the most of me while you've got me. I shall give your ma notice direct minute she comes back." "Oh, Martha, haven't we been so horrid to you as that?" said Anthea, aghast. "Oh, it isn't that, miss." Martha giggled more than ever. "I'm going to be married. It's Beale, the gamekeeper. He proposed to me. We've been seeing each other ever since he brought you home from the clergyman's house. And today I said the word and made him a happy man."